when you can see that your actions or behaviors or decisions are being reflected in others' actions, behaviors, and decisions, then you know that there's something that is speaking to them from you that is resonating, is impactful. That's one of the ways. So that's not just saying yes or smiling or accepting the meeting. That's actually following through in terms of action. I think that's one of the examples where that's more substantial.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through. Hi, and welcome to the 25th episode of the Life in Transition podcast. I'm super excited just to have a little update for you and to say thank you to all of the thousands of listeners we have and to the many guests as we take a look back of what it took to make this 25 episodes and what the reach has been and what the feedback has been. And I want to say, first of all, big thank you to all listeners and all guests. Maybe the most interesting feedback has been from listeners. I've had listeners request transcripts of like Jake Cortez's transition in prison to give to a stepson that was in prison. I've had a lot of feedback from several people, from several listeners saying that the information is concise, like complex topics made concise and made actionable, where they're really applying it in their lives. And that's incredibly rewarding to me. And I know it's been very useful to you too from the feedback that I've gotten. So thank you very much. I'm really excited. As of the end of March, this podcast has thousands of downloads, has thousands of unique listeners. We are reaching people in 78 countries, as far away as Ghana and Costa Rica and Malaysia and New Zealand. Many countries have a lot of listeners. I mean, obviously, U.S. is first, but Germany, Mexico, Sweden, Romania, South Korea, Netherlands, UK. So really appreciate the very wide and international audience that we have, where it's really reaching a chord. Since we relaunched this podcast in October, our listenership is up over 1,500%, 15 times since then. And just last month increased by 20% again. So I'm gratified by the difference it's making. Also, feedback from guests that I've had several guests that have said that they felt like this was a wonderful experience with them, that they reached places of depth inside themselves that they haven't in a long time in a lot of conversations, and had realizations that are helping them to grow and to learn. And that they also feel like that this is something that it seems like I've been doing all my life, and I feel really honored and grateful to be in it. I love doing it. And that's really gratifying feedback. So once again, really appreciated. A couple of interesting notes too. The number 1 and 2 episodes of listeners so far is the Couch Potato to Ultra Marathoner and Anxiety to Peace. Those are the 2 highest rated. And the highest one with a guest is the Journey of Courage and Transformation with Gunnar Vestfall. So if you haven't listened to those 3, you might want to go back and listen to those. Those are the ones that are the most popular so far. And I really appreciate you being part of this journey. If this podcast has been useful to you, I would ask that you rate it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave a written review on Apple, and also send me an email on art@artblanchford.com with your thoughts. I really appreciate it. What can we do to improve? What's working well? What have you learned? What are you applying in your life? How is it making things better? So thank you so much again for being part of this wonderful and exciting journey, and look forward to hearing from you. Welcome back to Life in Transition podcast. I'm really excited today to have Gavin Flook with us. And Gavin Flook is a 30-year professional service firm partner, where he also set up the internal university there, and has now transitioned to coaching and other philanthropic services or activities. And he's also a friend of Gunther Westphal. You guys remember a great podcast we had with Gunther Westphal, and that's how I connected with Gavin. And you also notice a different background for me today, sitting in my New Mexico home, the first time I've done a podcast from here, and really excited about that, Gavin. So excited to have you with us. I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to be with us today. Most welcome.
Thanks. Nice to be with you today. Looking forward to it. It's a beautiful day, and looking forward to the next hour or so.
Excellent, excellent. Jumping right in, what is one of the biggest or most meaningful transitions that you've been through in your life? And I know you have very interesting. I had really the luck of talking with you a little bit on the introduction call and learning about your story. A very interesting story. But right now, what do you feel is one of the most significant or meaningful transitions that you've made in your life, Gavin?
And probably the biggest transition that I say with the biggest significance, and there've been a few transitions in my professional career and personally as well. I think it's the one when I exited Deloitte and chose a different career path, early retirement type situation, which has turned into a much bigger change actually than I probably anticipated at the time. It's been a wonderful journey so far.
So how was it a bigger change than you anticipated? What made it a bigger change than you thought it would be?
When I decided to retire, I thought it'd be a short break, maybe 6 months or so. This was COVID times, so everything was a little bit uncertain.
Right.
I thought it'd be a short break, sort of an extended summer, and then I would get down to my new business, which would be as a coach. And I had the impression that I could get out and start meeting people, reconnecting with people from my Deloitte days and beyond, and start talking to them about how I might work with them and do that in a face-to-face way, which I'd always done. And I'd always been, even if it involved a lot of traveling, I'd always tried to conduct business face-to-face. But things didn't quite work out, of course, like that, not least because of COVID. But also because I realized that I was entering a new journey, and there were other dimensions of that journey that I thought I should take the time to appreciate, to enjoy, and learn from. So that transition ended up taking longer, but at the same time was more enriching, more educational, and but pretty satisfying would be a good way of summing it all up. There's a lot has happened in that 4 years, but if I had to summarize it in a few phrases, I think that would be it.
So you said that the transition took on other dimensions. Like there were other dimensions, other things besides just the career change. What were some of those dimensions that were touched by this transition or affected by this transition, or I don't know, because of this transition?
One was just by stepping out of the intensity and complexity of the business that I've been in for 30 years and the travel and so on. And that brought pressure and stress. It was really a sort of decompression from that intensity that I had probably underestimated at the outset. Having had a couple of months working from home as COVID started, I thought, well, this is quite nice, not doing the travel, and that recovery period had somehow started. But the more time I spent away from that life with my family, and I realized that I really needed that break, and I needed to clear my head from having been involved in so many things, having lots of things on the go at any one time, and surprises coming on top of that inherent in professional services life. Just that opportunity not to have my head filled with all of those things was something I had not really appreciated until it started to emerge. That was definitely a big dimension. And what came with that was a little bit of more care over diet, more care over physical fitness, and getting back up to date with my health checkups and doing some exercise or treatments that perhaps had been recommended some time ago, but I got round to it because I was so busy. So there was a reflection, all of the things I needed simply to get over what I'd been through. But at the same time, another layer of that more emotional layer was a bit of a grieving process.
And
Leaving
grieving for the
somewhere
loss of
this,
that career, the loss of that phase of life.
yeah, 30 years of my life in one firm. Even though it was a change I had elected for, it was me that put on the table with our executive this idea of an early retirement package to enable the firm to keep moving and taking in new partners. So something that I was very much for and promoted, but still that moment when I got the phone call confirming, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And oh, okay, well, that 10 days time, I'm leaving, and what goes through your mind is, well, what does that mean? One part of that, of course, was not having to work so intensively, not being financially rewarded in the way that had come with that, but the network of people as well. I've been used to working with extremely bright, motivated, and influential people on a daily basis, and that was being taken away as well. So this sense of grief was underlying, and that was a constant fluctuation between those two elements of sort of the pleasure that came with having a bit more freedom and space, but also the pain that came with letting go of something that had been really a part of me and rather integrated with my identity for so long.
Yeah, wow, you've said a ton there. I mean, there's a lot in those last few statements. I mean, first of all, you realize that the intensity of which you were living your life was taking up a lot more space in your life than you had realized until you paused, right? Even taking over things of health. I would guess even taking over things of relationships. Like if I would guess you had a lot of social connections also in the firm, and that was a lot of your friendships and a lot of your social life, right? So that's a big realization, right? That was taking up a lot more space than you realized. I think also this part that you bring up about grieving, Gavin, I think is really important because people often think, hey, if I choose something, then why, then I'm being stupid or I'm being silly if I feel sadness or I feel grief around that. But the fact is, grief is just it's just acknowledging a loss.
Yeah.
And even if you choose something, letting it go is still a loss of that thing. Right. So I think that's really I guess it's a testament to your emotional maturity that you recognize that at the time and realize that is a valid reaction, a valid reflection on that. Because a lot of people don't go there. They think, well, that, they sort of hold that feeling away because they think it's stupid because this is something I chose. So why am I feeling sad? But it is a loss. And it's like you said, it was your identity for 30 years. And I would guess that it was also a lot of your social relationships. Like they were probably not, I mean, I'm just extrapolating from my own experience, but maybe I'll just ask you, did you have a strong circle of friends outside of your professional experience, or was that most of your social life as well during those, intense times anyway of the 30 years?
I do have friendships that sort of precede my time in the firm, and I relocated a couple of times as well. So I've gone through that process of having to refresh social connections. But definitely there was a cycle of the meetings accompanied by dinners or conferences. So that social part was all wrapped in. And I had some very close friends in the firm as well. And some of those close friends have stayed with me. What I it was also part of the grief cycle was I'd always thought of my colleagues and partners. I took this idea of partnership quite literally in a sense, and thought of my partners as friends, associates, acquaintances, work colleagues, all wrapped up into one. But once I was outside, I knew intellectually, but maybe didn't appreciate the full impact emotionally, that things will move on. It was COVID, so people weren't getting together that much anyway. And whilst a lot of my former colleagues did reach out and they called or they emailed, it wasn't a tsunami because I wasn't the only one going through what was quite an uncertain time. So even those who stayed and had that confidence of the future with the firm did not know exactly how the economic circumstances would pan out, what it would mean personally for them and health-wise with their families, what would happen with their clients' businesses. So again, these are all reflections I could have because I had the space to process it all. but it was definitely a lesson that no one is indispensable.
You're right,
Not
as
even
well.
me
Yeah. Yeah.
after 30 years. And
And if we park on
I
that for a second, Gavin, because I think that's also something a lot of people feel. You obviously felt it. I felt it. In like, hey, I'm what I'm doing is really valuable. I add a lot of value to this organization. And you had mentioned before that it was your identity, like that you had a lot of your
mm,
identity wrapped up in this. But that also, as soon as you left, but not until you left, you realized that you're not indispensable. That somebody else could also do. What was that? What was that realization like for you? And what would that have? How would that have informed maybe how you behaved while you were still in that role if you had realized that earlier?
yeah, yeah, it's interesting and reflecting on it now because I'd always, having gone through many transitions, I'd always really tried to bring a successor on. And in this situation, as I was leaving the firm, I had a successor in place with whom I've been working closely for some time, and then I had other bits of my role that I also had successors for. So I knew that I had others to take over what I had done, but I think I still felt that I was leaving a bit of a hole in terms of I'd accumulated this sort of institutional knowledge of the organization. I think, a reasonably unique skill set and experience set over those years, and that's maybe where I felt that I couldn't be replaced. But it's very intangible that just knowledge you have and all the relationships and the connections that I've been able to make. So that was worrying in a sense because I'd like to have left behind an even stronger footprint of those values and that behavior. But I may be underestimating the extent to which my colleagues embodied the same values and behaviors. It wasn't entirely associated with me, but that was definitely something that I felt that it was quite unique in my contribution, and that's not something you can pass on to a single successor. Let's say here's my list of tasks and responsibilities. Oh, and by the way, this is how I embodied being a partner in the firm or being a leader in the firm. It may well have been there, but it wasn't so tangible.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, you want to pass on certain values and stuff, and everybody else coming up, every partner wants to have their own imprint on the firm and their own way of being. So if you had realized, let's say, because you mentioned that it was when you took a breath, when you took the pause, you realized there was a lot of other things in your life, other dimensions that you weren't taking. I'll put the words in your mouth. You weren't taking good care of, or as good care as you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Your health, your emotional health, doing the exercise, the way the way you're eating, spending time with your family. I mean, if you had realized 10, 15 years before that there are other people in the firm that could do, because what you're saying when you're saying you're replaceable is
Mm-hmm.
there's other people that can do what you're doing, or at
Yeah.
least to a high extent. If you had had that realization 10 or 15 years before, would you have done anything, excuse me, would you have done anything different during those last 10 or 15 years of your career? How would that have informed what you were doing,
Mm.
how you were doing, how you were
Um,
interacting with your job and your career at that point?
I think it would have made me a bit more conscious and deliberate. I'd like to think that I had always paid attention to how I work with other people and gave them space and opportunity to grow. I did take some care of my health and family and so on when I was there, but it was all a little bit rushed and had to be done alongside, sometimes behind, just the needs of clients, the deadlines that were coming, the priorities that were changing, all of those things that took up the main part of mental and emotional capacity, and everything else had to be somehow squeezed in. And even if I could say I ticked a lot of boxes, people know what your priorities are. And very rarely are you going to make priorities out of those softer elements in a way that people understand that actually they are the most important. And that'd be one of my reflections, is that if I had known then what I know now, I would have been a bit bolder, more explicit in showing to others that the ability to self-reflect, the ability to take a step back, the ability to say no, are really the elements that will make you sustainable as a professional.
So
And
say more about that, because that's exactly the question I was wanting to ask. Because you said you had this priority. It was clear that your priority was your work. But on the other hand, that wasn't sustainable. Like that, and the question I was going to ask is, as a professional service, partner for 30 years, you're in this space a lot. It's a very demanding space. From what you see now, how is taking better care of yourself? You mentioned the word awareness, which I love. I would have been more aware. How would that have affected your professional performance, do you think? Because, if someone's in that space now, if they're a, 40-year-old, 45-year-old partner in a firm, they're probably going through their head similar to what was going through your head at the time, or anybody that's working a tough job or caring for somebody and they're completely wrapped up in their work. They're feeling like they can't do that. It would be bad for their performance. And that's why they're putting so much into it. So how, with the space and the reflection that you have now and the work you're doing with others, which also I'm sure informs how you see that, talk a little bit about, or tell us your experience on how do you think that would have affected or would affect others' performance going forward if you took that time for more awareness and more reflection while you were even in that career?
Yeah.
Is it good for your career? Is it bad for your career? What do you think? If you say no, you had that evil word of saying no.
I can't say that the way I was conducting myself was bad for my career, and I can't say that it was disastrous for other elements of my life.
Sure.
But the way I squared the circle was through a lot of time spent and effort made, sacrifices of myself, but also of my family and others around me to just try and fit it all in, because there was just so much. So I think the reflection now, my guidance to others, is to really work hard earlier in our careers to understand who we are, how we work, and how we are seen by others, and let that be a guide as to how we choose priorities and say no and so on. I was more accumulative. I would try to do everything. And through luck or I think some skills, I was able to do that, but it's not really using that word sustainable. So I think understanding who we are and allowing that to guide, and then being more careful with choosing priorities, because that's a reflection on the career. Is you really get the way you're perceived by others is the big wins, the big things you do and how you do them, but it's not by doing 15 different things. It's actually in my own case, I was remembered for bringing in some very big clients, and later in my career some people were thinking, well, where's the next enormous client, not realizing that it was maybe a sort of once in a lifetime type period where I'd been associated with bringing in 2 or 3 very big accounts, and that there wasn't that the same opportunity later, or same combination of circumstances. So that's a lesson, that we do get measured by the big stuff that we do rather than lots of smaller things, and those smaller things can be very self-satisfying. They could please ego, they can please lots of different people, but in a bigger business sense, they maybe don't make the big difference. And when everyone else is busy, they don't have the capacity to notice lots of stuff. They'll notice something that's more significantly impactful. That will resonate with them and help them in their choices and inspire them in their actions.
So one of the specific advices is do fewer things that have more impact, in a sense, or don't make yourself crazy about a lot of small things and answering all the emails and trying to take care of 15 clients as if they're all equal, or 15 projects, or 15 people, whatever your career is. but to focus on
Yeah.
the fewer things and give more of yourself to those, less of yourself to the little things, and have a more lasting impact from that.
Yeah. Less is more
Less
is
is more.
more than just a catchphrase. There's definitely something in that.
I was listening to Cal Newport talk about his new book this week called Slow Productivity. And that is not his first thing, is to be lifetime wise, if you really want to be productive, is to do fewer things and do them really
Yeah.
well. Right.
Yeah.
So no, that's a really good point. The other thing that you said that I want to come back to, Gavin, is you said, know
Mhm.
who you are, right? Early in your career, know who you are. And the question I have is, how do you do that? Like, what does it mean to know who you are?
Yeah, I think to if I think about how have I learned who I am, um, paying more attention to how others interact with me. So listening, but not only listening, it's reading how others see me, because whilst we can try and explain ourselves, justify ourselves, because that's what I want or what our ego is putting us towards. Actually, there's a reflection in who we are in how others see us, and that's something that I had really, despite the occasional 360-degree feedback and so on, wasn't something I placed enough weight on. So
And
that would definitely be one
how
of
do you
my.
know when you say, it's more than listening, how others see us? How do you separate the difference of like awareness of honest assessment of others, of you, that's meaningful and productive, versus just a sense of wanting to please others? Like, how do you separate between, because it is a very valuable tool, but it's something I've struggled with, to know that difference. So how do you know, like, what's, I'm going to call it, real useful feedback, and how do you see more
Yeah,
than just listening versus just trying to please somebody?
yeah. Well, when you can see that your actions or behaviors or decisions are being reflected in others' actions, behaviors, and decisions, then you know that there's something that is speaking to them from you that is resonating, as is impactful. That's one of the ways. So that's not just saying yes or smiling or accepting the meeting. That's actually following through in terms of action. I think that's one of the examples where that's more substantial. Another one is when you get feedback over time. So getting feedback at one point in time has itself kind of a whole other discussion about how what feedback does to the brain when I'm going to give you feedback. But that's
Especially
why
with the person in
having
authority.
feedback, having feedback over time, so having multiple reference points is
Okay.
another way, because you could get some kind of feedback on one occasion that's circumstantial, but how much weight to place on that until it's in multiple circumstances, or the same circumstances repeat. Has the behavior changed? Has the outcome changed? Does the feedback change? So it's not just occasional upward feedback or 360. So that's one thing that I paid probably insufficient attention to, and maybe in the environment or it was in my own sort of reaching out. It wasn't done on a sustained basis where it could be really valuable and convincing.
Right. Okay. So it's not just listening in the one time, it's looking at people's actions and how they interact with you, and whether they're being affected by you, whether you're being affected by them. And it's also over time, from one particular source and or from multiple sources, and to
Yeah,
really try to put that together. And again, have a little bit, to use your word from earlier, a little bit more awareness about that would have been really useful for you. So I have a question. When did you make this transition? How many years have passed since you made this transition? This was during COVID, exactly when so it's 2020, or
just as COVID started, so it was just less than 4 years ago,
okay,
spring of 2020.
okay. And looking back on it now, are there things that you would have done differently? Or how do you feel about the transition that you've made at this point, 4 years from now? I mean, that's time for some perspective.
Mm. Yeah. I don't know what I would have done differently at that moment. So I made one or two significant decisions quite quickly. One is that I would really accept, despite the pain and the grief, I just really just want acceptance, because I was convinced this was the best for me, for my family, for
How
the
did you know that?
organization
How did you know
as
that?
well.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm really curious about that because you said I was convinced, right? So you had some conviction. How did you know? Like what convinced you? Where did you get that sense of knowing, Gavin? Because I think that's where a lot of people trip. Like how did you know? How were you convinced?
Mm. I had something to cling on to in terms of what's always been important to me, which is helping others to grow, develop, improve. In whatever role I had, I always had that focus on whether it was signing up for training, I did recruitment activities, and I would be the one who would get all the performance reviews done and so on. And that didn't always happen. I would always take the time and sign up for mentoring or whatever. And establishing the Lloyd University was another example of that. So I had that sort of powerful pull in me, and I had a vision of how that part of my professional life could continue outside of the firm. So as a coach, as it
So this
happens, I could also
main dream
continue.
of who you were, who you are, was continuing, and maybe you even
Yeah,
saw a better way to apply it than what you were doing in your current activities.
yeah, I could dedicate myself to it rather than having to sort of fit it in
Okay.
around everything else. So I think that was a powerful part, and probably the other element that not wanting to get back into another intense career, whether that was in another professional services organization, or I could have used my finance background to be a CFO or board member, audit committee chair. All of those things might have been open to me, but there was that sense I needed to give back to myself as part of it. But my family had been on this journey with me, and despite maybe not being so clear with them that I recognize their sacrifices, I recognize their sacrifices. So it was really time for me to say, well, I'd like to be more connected with them, help my daughters. They were just entering the teen years. They in their education just reached key milestones. So I was much more curious about their development. Childhood, different story. My wife and I had an understanding that that was sort of her area, but the further the daughters got into education, I was more and more interested and got involved with their schools and so on, so I could spend more time with that. So I was paying back a debt, if
And
you
then when
like.
that was the main reason, you said you didn't want to go back into an intense career. And was that the main driver? Is you're like, I
That
want to
was
have this
certainly a
time?
main, yeah, that's definitely a main driver was to be spending more time with them. And the unknown, which is I wouldn't have changed anything at that point, but also I wasn't planning it, and maybe I could have done more to plan it, was the activities I've become involved in the charitable sphere since, which rather landed as opportunities which I could take because I had the capacity and the will. That wasn't something I particularly had on my radar screen 4 years ago. Had I thought about that more deeply, I don't know if I would have done anything differently, but that's the one thing that just wasn't in my mind consciously 4 years ago to
Because
be
you didn't
involved
have
in
space. But having put the
yeah,
space,
I
like
didn't
when
have
when you
space,
opened
and
up the space, something could show up in that space.
that's right. And I had no particular target there. I had a target to spend time with my family. I had a target to help people, the charitable work. I had a will, and maybe the capacity was opening up. I had no particular target there.
So interesting. So, and how meaningful is that work that you're doing, the charity work that you're doing today? How meaningful is that to you right now?
It's meaningful, but it's again a balancing act now.
Right.
But pretty much every day I'm touching all of the dimensions of this portfolio of giving back that I've assembled. So I'm doing the school runs, I'm doing my coaching work, whether it's directly coaching or work around coaching, learning, and networking, and so on. And I'm touching each of the charitable organizations. And there were different moments. Sometimes those activities are administrative in nature, they're connecting people, got to get something done. And other times it gets quite emotional, of course, when whether I've just had an exchange with one of my board members on the charity that we founded together for Ukraine volunteers for Ukraine. And he shared that he's setting up a business in Ukraine. He shared that he senses that there may be another wave of refugees coming, and that's where we started 2 years ago. We helped find homes for more than 100 refugees in our community with our friends and so on.
Wow,
And
that's amazing.
he
That's amazing. And just for people to know, where are you sitting? Where are you living? You said found refugee homes in our
just
community.
outside Prague,
Okay.
so in a small village called Pruhanica. So most of our friends and neighbors were very kind in various ways and helped, either directly housing the refugees when they came over, or they were giving to collections of food and medicines and clothes and shoes and kids' books and toys and everything that we pulled together. So that was where it started. Then the next wave was helping send help or helpful products like generators, laptops, and so on into Ukraine. But what he shared with me today, he thinks that we may have to redirect our efforts again to help people who might be looking to leave, because life there is really so tough, especially if you're close to the front line. So that's the emotional side. We're really invested in the plight of people that we're helping. Last year I was in Kenya in a fishing community on Lake Victoria, where the teen girls often don't complete their education. So an organization that I came into contact with through doing some pro bono team coaching was setting up a summit for visiting leaders and coaches to help the girls on the ground, 130 girls in 4 different cohorts that they've been working with. So actually being on the ground and seeing the hope from the despair, seeing the reality of living conditions, hearing the stories of what's happened to some of the girls and how far some of the ladies have come from that community to do really remarkable things. There were some of the speakers, and that was just an emotional roller coaster as well. And that's an organization I'm still in touch with. So swinging between doing the technocratic work of running an organization, actually, and occasionally getting really into the substance of what these organizations are doing. And that's another part of the sort of my emotional development, I suppose, is being exposed to more such situations and really allowing it in, not just saying, well, I'll help by sending some money, or I like the Facebook posts I'm actually getting
Right. Actually, in this human contact. But I mean, to make a difference, in a very impactful difference in a critical moment in 100 lives from people coming from Ukraine, or these 130 young ladies in Africa, how has that affected you? Like being in what you're calling in these emotional situations, I call them like the human situations, like really getting your fingers in the mud, right? Not just sending a check or social media, but really connecting on a human being level to other people and making a difference. How has that affected you?
It's made me realize how lucky I am, and we are in a way, that I'm in this position to be able to help. You look at things through a different lens. The room where I'm speaking to you from was where we gave a home to a lady who fled with her 2 young children. and seeing them. We helped her to find a job, and she's still in our neighborhood. She's found her own accommodation now. And seeing her and feeling pleased that we've been able to give her some stability, but also think she's living in a foreign country. She hasn't grown up here. Her family is still back home. The male members of her family are still either conscripted or somehow involved in defense. So just seeing things that you could read in newspapers or even see on television, but when you see it through more through the eyes of people you've met face to face and you've been helping and listening to, and the one of the two boys, because it was International Women's Day last Friday, he came with his visiting grandfather because the mum was with the younger boy getting dental treatment, and they knocked at the door. Roma, who's now 15, I think, with his grandfather knocking at the door, bringing a box of chocolates to my wife, because she's the one who in reality did a lot of the help finding them schooling and work and so on. And that was really, really touching. And seeing the teen girls in Rusinga Island in Kenya, and thinking, well, I've got two teen girls at home, and to some degree, because it goes with their gender and their age, they're going through some of the same life challenges, but entirely different circumstances. Again, massive reflection of how lucky or unlucky we are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
through these different circumstances, and that's I'm a person who might be quick to judge. That's been a massive wake up. So the judgment isn't very helpful. It doesn't always serve anything really useful. So it's far more curiosity of, okay, what's the system around this situation, and there's normally some reason why something we look at or experience is strange to us or uncomfortable or dangerous. It's not normally driven by someone making a bad decision or displaying bad behavior or having bad values. There's something influencing around them.
Yeah.
And that's where the help can be addressed.
No, so when I hear you, the way that it's really affected you, I mean, a lot of ways, but I think about judgment, like stopping judgment. Judgment shuts us down. It's the opposite of an open mindset, right? It stops curiosity that you mentioned. I love that word, curiosity. It opens, right? Like, what's going on here? How can I help? What are the circumstances behind? One of the things that I always remind myself when I start to judge is there, I look at a situation and say, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Right? Somehow I've been lucky. You use the word lucky a lot, where I didn't end up in that situation, but I easily could. And that keeps me in a situation of open mind and curiosity and how can I help, which I think is really great. And listening also to what you said, like, I realize in your service and your connection to others and helping others, another thing that you didn't say this word, but I got it really clearly, is that makes you really grateful for your life, right? Really grateful, and to experience that gratitude. And I was reading James Clear's Thursday newsletter last week, and he said, the surest way to create hell on earth is to focus on what you don't have. And the concrete way to create heaven on earth is just to appreciate what you do have. Yeah. Right. So you're moving yourself toward heaven, in a sense, just by engaging very humanly and seeing the connection between us, and then being really grateful for the life that you have and being able to give back for that. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing those stories. And that wouldn't have had, and this is the thing that I think is so wonderful. It's like, if we're so busy, even when you talk from a career perspective, you talked about being busy with all the small things, where a few big things makes a bigger difference, a more lasting impact. The same thing on the schedule as a whole. Like, what you did is something really courageous. You made space for something else to grow, for something else to show up, right? And space is a scary thing, especially for people that are used to being busy all the time. To have, we think it's doing nothing and it's useless, and I'm wasting my life, or whatever the case is. But space is a good thing, because it gives room for other things to grow. I heard you say, a while back in the conversation, that I didn't intentionally do any of this. It just sort of happened. but you
Yeah.
did give it space somehow with this knowing and conviction where it could show up and where it could grow, and then nurtured it when it did. So I really commend you for that.
Yeah, if I just jump in there, I wrote some notes earlier that one of the things I've sort of earned is the freedom to choose and sometimes to do nothing. But actually, what you're saying makes me reflect that doing nothing is one way of looking at it. I could, whether it's watching TV, taking a walk, taking a bit more time over anything, because I'm not in a rush. But that's the other way of looking at it. It's not doing nothing. It's giving space
Mhm.
for something,
Yeah, that's right.
which you don't know what that is.
That's right.
And it could be an idea. It could just be a reflection or the opportunity to say yes when asked because you are not busy at that moment.
Right. Yeah. It's really like one of the things I think about. I have only, of all my nieces and nephews, I only have two that are young left. But as I'm
Mm.
not near as busy as I used to be, I have more space. I'm finally getting to be an uncle. And I have lots of
Uh-huh.
nieces and nephews. But I mean, and yes, of course, officially I'm their uncle by blood, right? But I wasn't really an uncle. But these two young boys that are still young, and now that because I've given space, I'm on the phone with them all the time. I'm on FaceTime with them all the time. I see them a lot, and it's really cool to be an uncle. And I never really was an active uncle before because I didn't have space. I hadn't created the space for something else to grow. And it's a continual
Yeah.
reminder for me to keep that, to keep space. I've been doing this health program recently with a functional medicine doctor to try to improve my digestion. He said, one of the things is,
Uh-huh.
do you have to eat when the time of eating for every meal should be no less than 30 minutes, actual eating.
Uh-huh.
Chew each bite 30 times.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. I've
and,
heard
and
that.
he
Yeah.
said that's, if you look at the cultures where people are healthy and last a long time, eating is a social thing and it takes a lot of time. So there's a natural cycle to things, and having space that has so many benefits that we don't realize. I mean, most of the time I would think, eating, it's a 5-minute thing, put some calories in, and that's it. So it is, I love this idea. Yeah. Of creating space. It's really an important one. It's one I continue to work on, but definitely there's some energy or influence or consciousness in the universe that brings interesting things to us when we have space for them and when we say yes.
Yeah.
And our lives go in a different direction than they would have, and in my experience, very fulfilling and enriching directions when I
Yeah.
do that.
With this the idea of space, um, one of the topics that comes up when you're out of this intense work is, well, is that better work-life balance? And one of the topics in work-life balance is spending time with family and so on. And in the old world, I'd always make time to spend with my wife, my daughters. But my reflection in the more recent past has been now they get to choose when they need me or want me because I'm available mostly, not always, because I do have these other activities. Whereas in the past, my wife used to be driven crazy. I'd come home on a Friday night or wake up on a Saturday morning and say, okay, what are we doing? Because I wanted to do something and go to the cinema or go on a trip or go biking, whatever it was, because I felt this need to show that I was still around. My daughters were too young or too polite to reject those ideas. My wife was the one saying, "Stop! I've been exhausted after this whole week of doing everything around the family. I don't want to fill the weekend with stuff
With
to
activity.
to do." But then I felt that was sort of taking away the only thing that I thought I could do for the family, which was to make us active. Whereas now this is an entirely different environment where my daughters get to rather choose. And sometimes, of course, they don't need me or want me because they're teens now. I'm more independent, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, and I think that's beautiful. And I think, it comes back to me about making space, that I also felt like, to be meaningful, we had to be doing something. But that's actually
Mm,
not the case at all. So I have now, most of the time, when I'm talking about with my kids, and my kids are 18 to 23 now, I just talk about
uh-huh,
dropping into their world. So my
yeah,
daughter's studying, and now we have such a close relationship, 18-year-old. She'll be like, "Hey, Dad, I need to do all the studying. Can you come sit in my room and read while I study?"
Oh, wow.
Right? Because she just wants to be in the same space. Right? Or she'll come home and
Yeah,
come down to my office 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and if I'm not on a call, she'll sit on my lap and tell me about her day for an hour and a half. And I
that's lovely.
love that we have that type of connection, and we do fun adventure stuff together too. But all of my kids, it's more about dropping into their like not let's go do something significant, but how can I participate in your world? How can I help you grow? How
Mm,
can I be present and collect you and be close to you while you're living your life? And it's a
yeah.
very different approach. And one of the things I think about, like you talk about making space, like so my son is in the fraternity that I was in when I was in school,
Hmm.
these Greek letter organizations, and the house is a wreck. And so he's like, Dad, we need to fix the house. Can you take over House Corps? The legal organization that owns the building, right?
uh,
Nothing I would have ever considered doing in the past. And now I'm doing it. Why? Because my son asked me to do it. And guess what?
yeah,
It's great. And I never would have thought of this either, because I would see that as administrative stuff that you were talking about earlier, which I hate,
yeah.
right? But actually, when I look at what I'm doing now, is I'm helping young men develop leadership skills and business skills and
Mm,
interpersonal skills, and even the younger men, like on the house corps as well, that are a lot younger than me, right? How to manage and make time with the family. And it's okay to take a half hour out of a work day to do something charitable and have a meeting about house corps, right? And so
mm,
it actually lines up perfectly with what I'm about. But I would have never known that. I never would have made space for that if I hadn't had space and just to say, okay, I'm available to drop into my kids' lives and not try to create something significant other than connection.
mm.
So it's it's beautiful about having space. And it's and I think also, like when you were talking about doing lots of small things versus doing a few meaningful things, there's probably nothing more meaningful than the relationship we build with people that we're closest to, and the legacy that
Yeah,
that leaves. If you talk about doing a few slow productivity, a few things that take a long time but are super meaningful, and they don't
yeah.
come from a to-do list. They come from presence and
Right.
awareness. Right. So good for you. You've mentioned this a lot already, but is there anything else that you would highlight on how your key relationships have changed, or what you've learned about relationships since making this transition? Because it's relationships really, if you follow this, and you probably have this, I can't remember the name of it now, but the Harvard Life Study, the latest version just came out, and I
Mm,
think it's called The Good Life, the book, and a report on this 86 or 87-year study. And I mentioned this a lot, but they emphasize that the people that have the highest quality of life are the ones that have good relationships. More
yeah.
than anything else, there's no stronger R value, there's no stronger correlation than relationships. So how has this transition affected your relationships, both friendships, spouse,
Um,
kids, family?
and probably I'm more aware of the value of not having an agenda or a perceived agenda in the firm, that there was always something had to be done. So my approach to relationships would be, I want to be partnering with you. And I had these partners, whether it's small p or large p partners throughout the firm. But the either it was something about my approach and maybe the transparency of my own ambition or business goals, or just the inherent nature of such an organization. I think there was often the perception that there was something else going on. And there really wasn't in many occasions, at least not consciously. But maybe that's my misunderstanding of the circumstances, or understanding who I was talking to. So I would approach every conversation. I want to be friendly. I want to be accepted. I want to have open doors that we can communicate with each other and cooperate together. But my if I took a one size fits all approach, that wasn't very thoughtful about how I was seen or what was needed from each of those partnerships or each of those conversations. Um, so I think now I'm still not perfect by any means, but maybe a little bit more aware, at least, There are some situations where the social connections are purely social. Nothing is expected, anything more than enjoying some time together, for example. So one of the things I do is organise monthly drinks for my community in the pub, and that's no business agenda or anything
Right.
more than
Absolutely. Yeah.
enjoying a few beers. But there are other situations where there's clearly some objective, something we want to accomplish, which could be my other sort of charitable activities with Rotary. And Rotary is a big global organization. I don't seem to be able to escape from big global organizations. And we need to get certain things done because everyone's a volunteer in Rotary. Everyone has limited time. So I think I'm now a bit more skilled at, yes, it's nice to have friendships, and people want to enjoy spending that time, that voluntary time together. But at the same time, we set ourselves some pretty serious goals or have to deal with certain circumstances. So in service of what Rotary is trying to achieve or what our projects are trying to achieve, we do need to be somewhat business-like.
Right.
And there is something to be accomplished beyond just having a convivial, friendly environment. So I think probably more awareness of these multiple dimensions of relationships, and again a bit more awareness of how it looks from the other side, rather than seeing everything through my lens. How I'm approaching things, how I see all my will or intention, to be more aware that it's a dialogue or a multi-log. It's not just something that I'm dictating.
Yeah, so I hear again that word several times about awareness and being awareness, and what does the situation call for? What does the person call for? What's needed here, instead of just your agenda, so to speak. And again, being aware, making space, seeing what's called on. Oh, that's really good. And obviously, those same tools applied in your family relationships also will make a similar impact. Very different than, hey, it's Sunday morning, let's go for a 20-mile bike ride, right? But what's needed here, and how can I serve? Oh, that's beautiful. If you could give one tool to our listeners from what you've learned through your whole life, but specifically thinking about transition, maybe this one, what's one tool that you would give, one thing that our listeners can use today that can apply? What would that be? Like, if there was one message that you would send to make the lives better, to manage transition better, is it one awareness or one tool or one takeaway that you would really like to share with our listeners? Gavin, what would that be?
I would reflect on this. I'm not saying it suits every situation, but it's a statement or an aspiration that I think would bring interesting insights and take you in the right direction. I use this phrase when describing myself to some people I hadn't met before the other day, that I have nothing more to prove than my will and ability to help others. And I'm saying that from a position of maybe having proved myself, maybe not, as a professional over 30 years. I've got experience and learning and network and financial stability. I don't have anything to prove in those areas.
Right.
But it'd be tempting to continue to
sure, absolutely.
stay on that hamster wheel. But to turn that around and say about having something that's directed towards helping others, whoever the others are,
right?
Family relationships, community, business partners, even.
Yeah, sure.
Coming at it from that.
So to not have anything to prove.
The tool or the gift I would share with others, to have that thought and really think through what that means, and find a partner with whom to have that discussion. You can't really have that discussion very effectively in your own head, especially when you're earlier in your emotional development and your business and personal life. That does take a bit of reflection. But if you have somebody with whom to have a discussion, spouse, partner, therapist, coach, business partner, someone whom you trust and respect, to have that sort of intimate discussion with, I think would be very, very helpful.
Sort of to take a step from stepping back from having to prove to trying to be somebody to build your resume to how do I serve? How can I be of service? What is the situation? And then to find somebody to have that discussion with, somebody that knows you well or has insight into you that can help you to have that discussion to move from trying to prove to trying to serve.
Yeah.
Great. No, thank you very much. One last question, Gavin. Wow, interesting life, interesting story. Where can people find out more about you? If they also want to see, you're doing a lot of interesting work. If they want to support it, if they want to be part of it, where can they find out more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Gavin Flook. I have a Facebook profile, an Instagram profile that aren't so professional, but they are me. And my website, gavinflookcoaching.com, where my current professional activities are described. And I'd love to have people visit, comment, connect, and have a conversation with me.
Awesome. And we'll put all those in the show notes. Are there like the charities that you're working on too, which also sound very interesting and very needed? Are those also connected on your website? Can people find those on your website, or should we add those in the show notes separately?
Yeah, Volunteers for Ukraine. Yeah, Volunteers for Ukraine has a website and is on LinkedIn and Facebook. You'll find them referred to with mine. And Rotary, you'll find on my profile. Dream, Believe, Repeat, which is the organization in Kenya, with whom I cooperate there, referred to there as well. So if you would like to find out more, go to my profiles and it's all
excellent there. And we'll make sure those are in the show notes for everybody so people can find out more and support. Gavin, I really appreciate you taking the time today. It's very interesting for me, and I learned a lot listening to you. And so thank you for that. And thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Much appreciated, Art. It's been lovely discussing with you, and love your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.